Hello again. So we are talking about a different thing now. We are talking about funding, and we are talking about small business startups, and we are talking about where there are some gaps between small businesses starting and small businesses succeeding. So if you've looked at some of the numbers recently, you'll see that there's a decent amount of growth for minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all of those businesses come out on the other side and are successful. So to start us off, Erin, I want you to talk to me a little bit about some of the stats that we've seen recently from Census.
Yeah, so we just had the preliminary census data come out from the Department of Commerce earlier this year, and we saw that from 2007 to 2012, for women-owned businesses, there was an increase of about 27, almost 28%, just from 2007 to 2012, which was pretty incredible considering the recession happened during that time. We're also seeing, just with our access to capital numbers, SBA itself, we hit record highs with our lending numbers, an increase of over 20%, and actually 26% increase for minorities and 19% increase for women just in the last year. So we're seeing a lot of numbers, and especially for women-owned businesses. The receipts for Hispanic women-owned businesses, 50% increase from 2007 to 2012. We saw over an 87% increase in the number, 67% increase in the number of African-American women-owned businesses, and about a 44% increase in receipts for African-American women-owned businesses. So there's still more to do, but we are in a much better place than we have been.
Right. So when we talk about the difficulty that businesses have in general, but especially women-owned and minority-owned businesses, the difficulty in succeeding, often we talk about funding. We talk about a funding gap, the difficulty getting funding, getting new funding, maintaining funding. So can we talk about what some of the reasons behind that are? I know there are many. Kellee, we talked about this a little bit. You want to start?
Sure. So I will say I founded a company that is kind of firmly in the tech startup space. And the numbers, I'm part of a group called Digital Undivided, which actually helps grow networks and support minority women, mainly African American, a few Latino women that are tech startup founders. And there, the numbers, they did a massive project. They sifted through a bunch of funding information, angel lists, TechCrunch. And what they found is in the past 5 years, they couldn't find more than about 15 minority women-founded tech startups that had gotten venture capital funding, like not 12%, like 12. And then if you go further and say how many raised over $1 million from those types of outside funding, we got down to about half a dozen. So it's really a tiny, tiny minority of minority women-founded tech startups. The reasons are just, they're complex, and there are many. There is a pipeline problem, the STEM education, that the lack of black women, minority women engineers that can go out and start startups. I personally think founding a startup is a luxury. It's kind of a privilege, to be able to say, all right, I'm going to quit my job and go without income for 6 months or 8 months or longer. It means that you're not supporting anyone else. No one else is depending on you. Not a lot of Black and Latino women can say that. It means that you have the network in place already for both your customer acquisition, the type of business you're starting, as well as funders, and a lot of us don't have that. It means that you've got a certain amount of, and then there's a certain amount of just good old-fashioned discrimination that takes place. So, you walk into a meeting with VCs, and they don't understand you, or they don't understand your business, or they're skeptical, and some of them are quite open about it. So there's a whole, and each person differs a little bit, but you will find some of those stories told over and over again when you talk to the women out there that are trying to do these tech startups.
Erin, I want you to
I think the venture capital conversation is a really important one, and I must say, we need diversity in the investment space to ensure that we're also getting diversity in the companies that are getting that type of investment. And we absolutely, the pipeline is important, STEM education, all of those things. But right now, when you look at the numbers, and less than 3% of women are getting venture capital funding, and women make up less than 6% of venture capitalists, but yet have 85% of the purchasing power in this country, you kind of go, hey, there's a gap here. So I think there's a real opportunity to have diversity in that investment decision space, in the venture capital investment decision space. I know at SBA, we have something called the Small Business Investment Company Program, which is a debt and equity program, $25 billion fund. And that's that's a way we've been really targeting increasing the numbers with minorities, and with women. And that's been a major focus for ours. We're actually just launched a report last year to kind of look at the types of companies that we're getting invested. And that's something we're looking to really push over the course of the next few years.
Right. And I think that starts in on where I want to go next, which is we know this is a problem. We have put some numbers on it. How do we fix it? Where do we start? Do we start at the funding level? Do we start with venture capital? Do we start at the education level? Where does it make the most sense to go to start bridging this gap?
Yes, everywhere.
Yeah, I was going to say all of the above.
Yeah.
No, yeah, not. I mean that's a easy answer, but it's true. It's not a simple problem, so there's not a single solution that's going to work. The other thing is, and I'm going to sound, even though I just finished raising venture capital money, I don't think it's necessarily always the answer. A lot of women have done like wonderful things with crowdfunding. It takes advantage of some of the networks that women already have and sometimes tend to have in place. So I think sort of the path should be open if that's the path you want to go to, and then there should be paths to create really successful, phenomenal businesses if you don't want to go a VC route or if you don't want to go, the sort of outside capital route.
I think that's a great point because you also don't want women to give up equity too early on.
Yeah.
And sometimes there might be a push because there is so little that, they might jump on it more quickly. So I think identifying all the options, crowdfunding, great point. And the SEC, regulations just came out a little while ago, and that, still remains to be seen like how that plays out. But I think that is an opportunity, and we see women really picking up on crowdfunding as an option. I mean, it's building on your community. There's a huge marketing component to it. But I do think all of the above is,
Right.
super important. And then I mentioned like the 85% purchasing power stat. I think women have a lot of power when they go and spend money, and they spend most of the money. So I think there's some social pressure that could be put on some of those investment decisions too.
And to what extent do you think policy and the government plays into that?
No, I think it's a great point. I mean, I think policy, we have policy decisions, we pass laws, there are things like that, and we do that with, like I mentioned, our SBIC program. We're making, looking at policy implications for the program we have. We've made policy changes in our access to capital. We've really looked at increasing the number of lower dollar loans and have made some fee waivers that have incentivized banks to do that. So we can have an impact on policy. I think government also has a convening power and an opportunity to just raise an issue. And so I mentioned Innovate Her. We're doing about 200 competitions across the country business competitions focused on products and services that impact women's lives. And that is really, number one, to start a conversation and to be able to talk about the innovation that's needed. And then eventually, as we get to the finals, number two, find something that could be commercialized. So I think using that platform is important.
Yeah. It's funny. I did a very little bit of time in a policy role, and then in some ways I feel like entrepreneurs are like the worst people to ask about policy. I used to be a well-informed citizen, and now, I
don't have time.
I have like one, role. I will say that it does seem like, to me, the challenge is translating things that are happening at the federal level to the local level. Because when I, as an entrepreneur, am looking for mentorship or support or funding, I'm thinking very local. I'm thinking, the city, here just in the DC area, there's all sorts of initiatives that have been supported by city government or by state government that I can tap into that's much more concrete and relevant than thinking about, okay, is Congress about to pass another bill that's going to, and what is it going to do in terms of, let's say something like IP property or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's I think there is a lot on kind of just simplifying it. I mean, I work in the federal government, and sometimes I have a hard time like finding things or figuring out how things play out. So I think that is a really important thing. I do think there used to be more of a gap between kind of the tech industry and government. I think a lot of the tech companies are also realizing and having more of a presence in DC. And I also think just understanding the policy implications is becoming more and more relevant and important. But I think to your point, it's hard for a lot of small businesses because they don't have the time, like a larger company, to understand and decipher certain things. So, there are associations that come in and other entities that can help fill that divide.
Right. And I want to ask two more questions. So the first is, what are some resources that you think are out there that are going underutilized or untapped for both women and minorities when it comes to learning about small businesses, starting their own, getting support, getting capital, just the whole spectrum of services that people could utilize to make their businesses more successful.
So I have one, SBA.gov, www.sba.gov. And I say that because we have 68 district offices across the country, and their job is to build relationships with the bankers, with the investors, and with the entrepreneurs. So I think that's a great resource that's free that, taxpayers pay for, so I guess, but it's a good investment in entrepreneurship in this country. And we also have 14,000 resource partners across the country that provide free and at low cost counseling and training. So you can find your local resources if you go to SBA.gov. You can also find out about the investment programs that I mentioned, our SBIC program, our lending programs. We have our we have our loan guarantee programs, but we also have a microloan program, and how to access federal contracts too. So I have to put a plug in because we don't have a marketing budget. So earned media is really important for the government.
Yeah, I would say that, look, if you know what you want, if you know that the entrepreneurship is the path you're pursuing, tapping into resources is actually not that difficult, in the sense that, my gosh, entrepreneurship is having a moment. Get on the right listserv, and there's more events and more courses that you can even go to. I think the focus now I'd be interested in seeing is on quality. So right now there's so much noise. Sometimes as an entrepreneur, it's hard to know which ones will help you in what you're trying to do. So,
right. And then, final thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit, and I think we've gotten into this conversation, is diversifying the businesses and the small businesses that women and minorities start. A lot of times when I do reporting and we talk about the gender wage gap, it's noted that the gender wage gap among small businesses that are women-owned is actually larger than the gender wage gap in the overall working world. And it's partially because of the types of businesses that women start. So they are not necessarily starting engineering firms, they are starting retail firms. And then you kind of have this broadening gap. So I want to talk a little bit about the importance of diversifying the types of businesses that people start, and what are some ways that you think that's something that we can achieve? Kellee, you seem excited.
Yeah, that's really hard because it comes out of your life experience, right? Like I started a company we do market data and trading for ag commodities that are organic or non-GMO. There are like 0 black women in doing that. The reason that I'm doing that is because I had the exposure early on. I was working with coffee farmers out of grad school. It came naturally out of my life experience. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a broader set of life experiences to choose from, you're choosing what you see next to you. So the sort of the short answer to that is we need women to be out there and be exposed to all sorts of interesting fields that traditionally we haven't been well represented in.
I would absolutely agree with that. I think a lot of it is experience. I will say, on the access to capital side, it's easier. You don't need as much capital for service-based industry, companies, and that's where women play a lot. Mm-hmm. We've seen when we did our changes in our lending, women were getting more loans because it was easier for them to get smaller dollar loans because their industries they were in were not as capital intensive. But I think there's something to be said if you can't get loans easily, which women are undercapitalized. It's very difficult. If you can't get venture money on, some companies as well, it makes it difficult for them to also get into some of those more high growth or capital intensive type industries.
Right. And I think now we want to move to the audience. We have 2 awesome people up here. Yes.
I have a question.
I think hold on one second. I think we have a mic. We want to make sure you're heard.
My name is Al Noor, and I'm an immigration attorney. And I think one of the things that is very interesting to me is that mostly among minority businesses, it is foreign nationals who have sort of come and joined the system than natural African Americans. So I think there's a great divide between the way we sort of educate people to be entrepreneurs or to be workers. And that really creates the larger problem in general, because the numbers overall for new entrepreneurs are that there are more foreign people coming here sort of starting companies and running companies than Americans sort of raising companies. So how do you plan to address that, or what is the SBA sort of doing about that?
No, that's a great point. We actually have a New American strategy. The White House started a New American strategy, and SBA is a big part of that because entrepreneurship is so important. And oftentimes, for a lot of immigrants, entrepreneurship is the only option. I mean, transferring education, requirements and other things, like entrepreneurship is it. And so I think for us, it's been very important. I know our women's business centers offer training in 90 different languages across the country. We have over 100 women's business centers. I know we've been looking at online trainings that are in other languages as well. And then we really look for mentors from some of those immigrant communities. We have SCORE, our small business development centers, and our women's business centers as our SBA resource partners. And I think it's really important to find folks who've done it in those communities and done it well, because those are individuals that new immigrants are going to really trust to kind of navigate things. And then I would also say for us, something that's been, we've looked at the faith-based community too. Sometimes people, a lot of folks won't trust government all of a sudden when they come in. So how do we work with community-based institutions, faith-based institutions that, can provide resources? We have a lot of, free information, training courses and other things, but how do we get to a lot of those new immigrants? I think it's a very important point, and immigrants are what make this country what it is. So it's an important investment from this administration's perspective and from SBA's perspective.
And I think we have time for one more question. Anyone?
So I know this because I'm part of the federal government. I'm from the Department of Commerce.
Oh yeah.
And one thing I would really want to point out about SBA, I mean, your strongest strengths, one of the strongest strengths, I think, is your ability to guarantee a loan. So a lot of people don't understand that you work with a commercial banker, right?
Yeah.
You're guaranteeing a loan from the commercial banker to the entrepreneur. So my question, my question is, so you do a lot of the underwriting. You work with the entrepreneurs. When you do approve, when you say yes, we will guarantee you. Does the commercial bank usually say yes, or do you actually have to kind of use your leverage and say, this may not be your normal underwriting criteria, but we really suggest that you take this? I mean, is it a standard kind of thing, or do you need to?
So we work directly with the bank. So the bank ultimately has the decision. What we can do, and I mentioned when we did a change in our lower dollar loan amounts, there were a lot of women trying to get loans and they couldn't. And for banks, it cost them the same to do a $5 million loan as it did to do a $150,000 loan. And we wanted more people to get some lower dollar loans because that's where a lot of women were playing, a lot of minorities were playing, and they couldn't even get in the pipeline. So we can change policies and we can work with banks. Banks have the ultimate decision. And a lot of people don't know they're getting an SBA loan guarantee. It's another marketing thing that we're working on. But they go to a commercial bank and they'll get, the banker will say, well, you could do your conventional loan, or we'll give you this loan guarantee, through the SBA. So it's ultimately up to the bank. I will say we also have our microloan program, which is a little bit, it's not through a conventional bank, it's through community-based institutions that can do microlending, and that's a great place if someone doesn't have the financial profile and has been turned down from the bank a lot. They can go and look at the microloan option. And it's only $50,000 or below, but it's a good start for a lot of folks. So the loan guarantee, thank you for pointing that out. We do not do direct lending. It is a loan guarantee with those conventional banks.
And we are unfortunately all out of time. Thank you guys so much, and thank you to the panel.
Thank you.